I want to start with some gratitudes. First, I want to thank Scoby Roshi and Whitelaw Roshi for this idea of a 90-day training around the habit of freedom. I admit I was skeptical. I thought, will anybody sign up for this? But there's been amazing, there's very good uptake, and it's helped us as a dojo, I think, to consolidate some thoughts around the the work of habit and how that shows up in our life for better or for ill. I also want to thank Kushner Roshi and Keel Roshi. They run the Madison dojo, Daiko Zenji. And when I proposed this idea of a series of talks in 2022, our intention was to have a little bit more outreach in the Madison community to bring people into the Madison dojo who may have no familiarity with Zen, and to broadcast into our Zen community and into the broader community as well. So it was a way of bringing our online dojo and our physical dojo together. This is the second talk that I am not doing from Daiko Zenji in 2022. And hopefully, I think it's going to be the last talk that I won't do from Daiko Zenji. So if you are in the Madison area, we welcome you 4 weeks from today to Daiko Zenji, where we'll be doing this. I'll be doing this talk live, hopefully with several of you there. And we will, for those of you who can't attend in person, do the feed live from Madison. The benefit of coming to Daiko Zenji is tea time that will follow the talk, full of delicious bakery. Those of you who have trained with us, you know we've got some wicked good bakers in our midst, and we'll be enjoying some fellowship together at Daiko Zenji. So I want to thank all 4 of those people for making this possible, to be this bridge out into the world. Today, and this entire 2022 series, the series talk, sort of the headline, is Stuff I'd Rather Not Talk About. These are things that I haven't heard other Roshis in our lineage talk about. I am on the edge of my comfort zone talking about them, and yet what all of us have in common, whether we are training in Zen or not, is this experience of being a human, with all of its joy and all of its intense frustration. So the series of talks is about being a human, and navigating this existence in this meat suit, and especially the rough parts. So in January, I talked about depression. This week, this month, I'm talking about when my spouse drives me crazy. The whole point is to bring those who are Zen curious into a conversation that we all have in common, being human, and to help those in our Zen community, whether you train intensely in Zen or you're training through the Institute for Zen Leadership, to maybe give another lens on your experience as well. Okay, so no Zen experience is required, and I'm trying to speak in a way that is accessible for everyone. So today's talk is when my spouse drives me crazy, and I want to just pull that apart a little bit. Okay, so let's start with the word spouse. You don't have to be married to get something out of this talk. I mean, you can fill in the blank for whomever drives you crazy. It could be a kid, it could be your mom, it could be a neighbor, it could be your first or second spouse. I don't know, but fill in the blank of the person that you have the interaction with that makes you just slightly lose your mind, right? Even that word choice is an interesting word choice. So when my spouse drives me crazy. So let's first look at spouse. It doesn't have to be spouse. Any relationship is fine. We'll take all comers. And then there's the when, drives me crazy part. Drives me crazy. The notion that someone could drive you crazy. We're going to be looking at that today. one of the things we talk about in Zen is resolving duality. And the duality that seems obvious today is the duality between self and other. Between self and other. Let's stick with this for just a second. Does anyone have the ability to drive you crazy? I mean, let's just really try to negate that a little bit. So, have you ever had the experience? So, I hope you're calling this person to mind who tends to drive you crazy. Have you ever had the experience where, in one set of circumstances, you have an interaction with that person and it just lights you up? And a very similar situation can happen with the same person, maybe after you've had a really good night of sleep or you're feeling extremely relaxed and you don't get agitated by it. Has that ever happened to you? You know, where sometimes that person and that topic really hook you and engage you, but another time the same person, the same topic, you're like, yeah, you know, you could go either way. If you've ever had that experience, is it true that someone else is driving you crazy? They haven't changed. The topic hasn't changed, but somehow one time it honked you off, and the second time you didn't engage with it. Right? That seems to indicate to me that it's not someone else who's driving you crazy. Let's look at it another way. Pick the topic. I was with a friend of mine a couple days ago. She was celebrating her birthday dinner. We were all out to dinner together, and she's got 2 sons. And she said, when I give them parenting advice, they have to be in 2 separate rooms. And I said, what do you mean by this? And she said, well, to one, I have to say, spend less money. And that's exactly the right parenting advice. And to the other one, I have to say, spend more money. And it's exactly the right parenting advice. So let's talk about this a little bit, right? With you, within your own lived experience, can one person in your life talk to you about a topic, maybe money, or pick a topic that can be a little sensitive, and you don't have any response to it? It's a neutral conversation. It's maybe an exploration. There's a lot of curiosity. It's a conversation that makes you feel okay when you leave. But with another person having the same conversation about the same topic, again, lights you up. If that can also be true, that a conversation about the same topic really fires you up with one person and is neutral with another person, is it also fair to say that maybe it's not a person who drives you crazy? It maybe is something in here about how you are responding to topic and person. All of this to say that the field of human interaction is ripe with growth opportunities. As one of my friends who happens to be on the call today would say, AFGO, another effing growth opportunity, right? So life is filled with these growth opportunities. And as we start to penetrate this question about dealing with a spouse or anyone who drives us crazy, maybe with whom we just routinely argue, let's be mindful that it may not be the other that has the agitation, but maybe it is just something in here. And I want to give some other examples of this as we go along. So here's the part where I'm going to invite you to turn off your camera. Mute your camera. Go ahead and mute your camera. Make yourself comfortable. There you go. Make yourself comfortable. And I'm going to invite you to call to memory an argument or a disagreement, sometime that you were crazy made, you were made crazy. And remember a time when it really got in your body, like something maybe happened in your body, like maybe you raised your voice, right? Or maybe you could really feel your heart rate go up, or maybe you had to excuse yourself from the room. Like that your body, you had an embodied reaction to this conversation, an embodied reaction to this conversation, right? So you all have something that you can reliably call to memory. Okay, so now what I want you to do is try to take the shape of what was happening in your body. So for some of you, it may have been a real, like a lean forward, like maybe you were really going to get into this conversation. For others of you who maybe aren't fighters, but maybe are a little less conflict friendly, maybe it was a turning away. But what if your body had to take the shape of what was happening for you in that crazy making time? Let your body fall into that shape. Let your body fall into that shape and hold it. Hold it. Now, get curious. Stay in this shape and get curious. Are you more closed or are you more open? What part of you are you protecting? What part of you are you leading with? If you have your eyes open, are they focused in narrowly, like on a pinpoint prick of focus? What are they looking at? Okay. All of the ways that your body is holding this memory is information for you. It's information. Okay, now come out of this posture. Maybe just relax into the kind of posture you want to have in your life when you're feeling and being and doing your best. So just let yourself come into that posture. And as you come into that posture, what had to be let go? What had to be released? And what is the quality of your experience in this posture versus the quality of your experience in the previous posture? There's a lot of information there. A lot of information there. So you can bring your camera back live if you so desire. And what I want to share with you is this this image that I think is extremely useful. Here's my argument about our confrontations or our crazy making with our loved ones. You see this pinball machine. Now, just imagine a head on the top and two legs underneath and some arms gently coming out of the side of this pinball machine. This is definitely me. I have got some stored up bangers in there that when that ball topic person hits it, it goes ding, 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 ding. All these points start to accrue. And then the flippers start going off, right? And pretty soon it's crazy town. And I'm not even like aware of what's happening with this pinball machine. It's like the ball just has a mind of its own and it's going everywhere. And I'm willing to bet that this is true for a lot of us, right? We're not exactly sure why, when we argue with our spouse about the same thing every time, we're not sure how the ball gets shot up into the machine exactly. We might have some idea, but sometimes these things take on a life of their own. And I want to bring this into what we've been studying together around the habits of freedom. And Scobie Roshi did a terrific talk recently about the energy of habits and the embodiment of habits. Now, even looking at this pinball machine, you look at this and you think, okay, wow, okay, I can see the flippers at the bottom. And those things are never close enough that they can actually routinely get the damn ball up. Those of you who are pinball heads, I know what you do. You guys lift the machine. I've seen you cheaters do this, and you jostle it around, right, to try to give yourself an advantage. But the way that these things are laid out, the flippers are laid out and the chutes are laid out, this isn't designed to win, right? This is designed to make you put quarter after quarter after quarter into this machine, and eventually you figure out the touch, right? The touch of the paddles, and maybe just exactly, my wife loves to play pinball, and she does this thing where she stands on one leg and then she has her second leg that's lifted go around and around in a circle. I'm not sure, I will get a video and send it to you. But there's a way that those of us who know how to play pinball well, you massage the machine and you do the things so that you rack up all the points. But coming back to human conflict, many of us are like idiots with this pinball machine. We don't know where the flippers are. We don't know how to stop the action. It just takes off, all over the place. And when I think about our human pinball machine, laying in our chakra system, right? There's some stuff that's stuck in some places. We've got some maybe tiny pebbles. We've got some larger rocks. Jeannie Whitelaw taught about like what fires together, wires together. So we've got some well-defined pathways of how we do things, how we process things. We all have our own pinball machine inside of us. But that doesn't mean it's hopeless. That arguing today with your spouse about something is what you're always going to be arguing about, because those blocked spots in us, we've got a Reiki master on the call here, we've got body workers and energy workers on the call, that those things can get unstuck, right? Our fascia can be loosened. Our habits can be loosened. Even things that look solid, like this inking, right? All of energy is particles and waves, particles and waves. And if you look really closely at particles, they're just waves, wave energy that's moving in such a small, tiny spot that it seems solid. But it's not. It's not solid. So all of us have these triggers. Most of us have these triggers in our body that we have the opportunity to work with. But they're not permanent. They don't have to be permanent, right? They're just stuck patterns of energy. They are just stuck energetic patterns. And as Scobie Roshi said the other night as well, this is the dojo. The body is the dojo. This is something that we can really, really work with. So let me give you an example from my own experience. Well, before I do that, all biological processes have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They all do. Beginning, a middle, and an end. And the same is true with arguments or difficulty, relational difficulty. There's usually sort of a beginning. You start feeling it get warmed up. Then there's a middle, a climactic, oh, depending on how it crescendos in your household. I was raised in the upper Midwest by German Lutherans. The crescendo seemed like silent treatment, but there was a lot being expressed during the silent treatment, right? And then there's the ending, right? Eventually it tails off. People forget about it. Time heals all things, right? Right? So there's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. And we've been talking about habits, and I just want to share one other image before I go into my own example of for our edification. So James Clear, the guy who wrote Atomic Habits, which has been one of the sources of our habit of freedom training, he talks about the 4 steps of the habit loop. It starts in the upper left-hand corner with the cue. Then it goes to item 2 there, the craving. Item 3, the response, and item 4, the reward. Now, let's talk through a difficult, crazy-making experience, right? And I'll use a personal example here. So, one of the things that used to be a major source of friction between my wife and I was our expectation and relationship to our cell phones, specifically the text messaging feature of our cell phones. My relationship with the text messaging function of my smartphone with her is that it is a 2-way walkie-talkie that is on at all times. So at any time I can go, ksh, ksh, are you there? Hey, what's up? You need any? I'm at the store. Do you need anything? And I would expect her to respond because it's a 2-way walkie-talkie on at all times. I am committed to you, therefore I am accessible to you. My wife's relationship to her smartphone's text messaging technology is far more reminiscent of a rotary phone that is plugged into a wall that you have to make an appointment to spend some time with. It's like a party. It's like sharing a phone with 15 other people. And if your text message even arrives, it may or may not be passed on. It may or may not be passed on to the right person at the right time in a timely way. And oh, by the way, there may never be a response, right? So you can understand how I'm like breaker 19 walkie-talkie expecting you to always be there. And my wife may not even have her walkie-talkie with her. It might not be on. It's just a completely different experience altogether. And I specifically remember one time when we had a knock down, drag out brouhaha over this. And we weren't living together at the time. I left, I slammed the door, I got in my car. I realized I was like not probably safe to drive. I backed up and I was kind of like speeding off and I was like, oh my God, Rebecca, slow the car down. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're just fighting over text messaging. And I thought, wow, like this woman makes me absolutely crazy. And I love her so much. And I share that with you because, you know, what I realized was that what this really was about, what this argument really was about, was that we didn't see something the exact same way. The fact that she had a different relationship to text messaging than I did irritated me. That's what made me mad. My belief was, well, we should see things in the same way. And obviously the way I saw it was the right way, right? So I wanted her not only to see it in the same way as me, but I wanted her to see it the way I saw it. Now, I share that, and let's walk through the habit loop here. right? You can imagine that the cue of all this was she did not respond to a text message, which is why I drove to her house, because I needed some information from her that she wasn't providing, and got a little worried, like, where is she? Got there, she was fine. She was like hanging out, and I was like, I need to know your answer to this question. I don't even remember what it was. I texted it to you, and she's like, oh, and then of course she wants to go and get the text message. I'm like, since I'm here, let me just tell you what it was, right? But the cue was that I did not get a response to this walkie-talkie, right? And what was my craving? It almost seems crazy to me to think that I was craving a disagreement with her. But what I was craving was for her to see things the way I saw them. And the disagreement was going to be the way to get to that. I mean, I thought that my powers of persuasion would be so fantastic, right? So the cue was no response to the text message. The craving was we need to see things the exact same way for there to be like peace in my life, right? The response was the argument. The response was the argument. And there was no reward. There was no reward for many, many, many months. Finally, we worked through this. I mean, have you ever had the same argument again and again and again with someone you love? Right? So much so that you're like, I have to just put this down. But in any event, to come back to this cue, craving, response, reward, it's kind of, when you think about difficulty with a partner or with a loved one, it's hard to think that you're craving the difficulty or that there's a reward for the difficulty, but often it is there, right? So you've got to be able to pull that apart for yourself. Now, to come around this habit loop from the cue to the craving to the response to the reward, sometimes there is a reward for arguing with someone you love or for having real difficulty with somebody you love, because sometimes you can rub against each other and influence each other to the point where you each get some release, like, oh, I actually understand what it is you're trying to express, or oh, now I get it. Now I get what you're saying, right? So there can be a reward. This is a little, PG-13, but you sometimes hear couples talk about makeup sex. And it's like, oh, is that the reward for having a difficulty with your spouse? You cue, you crave, you respond, and there's a reward. I do want to stay just focused on the reward a little bit more, because I'm not advocating arguing with your partner or with someone you love for the sake of advocating or for the sake of arguing. I don't think that's useful. And I also think boundaries are very important. It's important to have boundaries. But if you think about this habit energy and you can start to work with this habit energy, maybe it's possible for us to create a little space around the cue, to create a little space around the craving, a little space around the response, and a little space around the reward in a way that can help us become better humans, right? So let's talk a bit more about this. I'm going to stick with the cue, craving, response, and reward, but I'm going to take the visual down. If you've written it down already, you've got it, and I think it's easy enough for you to call to mind with your memory. When your spouse drives you crazy, there is a cue. There is. You might have to think about what it is, but there's usually a cue. So if you're, for example, the kind of person who gets more irritable if you haven't slept well, or if you've had too much coffee, right? You hold the cue in your body. Your own body becomes cued up for difficulty. And if you can create a little space around that, if you can create a little awareness around that and a little space around that, you can try to not put yourself in the way of a disagreement when you're in that pre-cued, like ready to rumble frame of being, right? You can maybe feel it in your body. But maybe you can't create space around the cue, right? Maybe you were just zenning it out, just blissed out, doing your own thing, and the cue happens, right? Your spouse does the thing that often sets you into overdrive, emotional overdrive, right? Well, in that case, maybe we can work with the second phase there, right? The craving. So, what is it that we're craving? Some of us growing up were raised in an environment that had chaos in it. Maybe had a lot of drama in it. And if we're being honest, there's something familiar about that in our bodies, and we may crave it. You know, like, oh, this is familiar. I know how to do this, right? And then that energy that had been calm and peaceful, right, gets called into action, right? You can probably see this in your friends. It might be easier than seeing it in yourself, right? But there's something in you that starts moving in to that space of craving, that difficult interaction. And then we're in the response phase, right? And in my experience, I've been to a lot of therapy in my life. And in my experience of working with therapists, they want to help you with the response part. And it's too late. You know, they say, well, can you tell your partner what she or he or they has just said to you in their own words? So what I'm hearing you say is, but by the time you're in that place, boom, you're already at 5:30 p.m. on a 12-hour clock. Like, it's kind of getting late at that point to de-escalate things, because there have been all these other steps leading up to that, right? So that's kind of the traditional Western way of working with the response, and then whatever the reward is. Now, cue, craving, response, reward. Let me take you through a bit of a more Zen approach to that. What might Zen have to offer in this moment? Let's come back to this idea that the central duality of our spouse or our loved one making us crazy is the duality of self and other. You have done something to me that is making me upset with you, right? We are having this difficult interaction. So what if we practiced being the other, right? An example from Zen is whenever we do Zazen, which is seated meditation, there is a jiki, right, which is the Japanese word. It's kind of like, I think of it sort of as like a hall monitor, right? They're the room monitor for the Zazen. They're responsible for making sure it starts and ends. They're responsible for helping raise the ki, the energy level, so that everyone has a very good sit. Good, an effective sit, that people are sitting as hard as they can, that they're training as hard as they can. And what often happens during training, during a intensive training period, like a Keishin or a Sesshin, is that the Jiki, during seated meditation, the Jiki will get up and they will walk the room. And it's kind of the equivalent of like an inspection. They'll walk slowly by every person's cushion. And what are they doing during that time? Well, they're becoming the other. They're experiencing the condition of the person sitting, and they're wondering if there's anything they can do to help that student be more effective. Is there a way that we could correct their posture? Is there a way that we could create a little pressure or release a little bit of stuck energy so that the person can sit more comfortably, more deeply? It's a beautiful example of become the other. And I have practiced this in my own marriage. For some reason, the kitchen is where we are usually having our difficult interactions. And recently, something was starting to bubble between us. And I stopped what I was doing and I faced my wife. And I tried to feel what her body was doing. I tried to like mirror her body in my body. And you know what happened? I was immediately disarmed because I felt the anguish of how she was coming into this conversation. I could sense two things immediately. One was how difficult this conversation was for her to have. And the second one was that she felt she didn't have resources to have this conversation. And I just, kind of like I did now, I just put up my hands, because if this disagreement had proceeded, it would have really hurt her. It would have been an unfair fight, because of how she was feeling anguished and poorly resourced. Shortest disagreement we've ever had, because it couldn't even start. In the cueing stage, I faced her. Become the other. Become the other. So, can you imagine for yourself the next time a cue starts up with the person you have disagreements with? And what if, instead of getting further entrenched and hardened up in your own pinball machine, you faced this person and you felt into their pinball machine, right? You can often tell from the way somebody is holding their own shoulders or their own head or their posture, right? You can tell. This is one of the magical things about being a human being, if you're neurotypical, is that you have a sense of being able to scan people's body language. And in Zen, if you've been training for a while, you can even interpenetrate into that felt experience. There is no membrane between you and the other person. You feel, you have sensitivity to what's happening. And that will often be enough to help the disagreement stand down. So one way to, during cue or craving or response, is to stop being the self in your own skin and become the other. What's happening for them right now, right? A second thing that you can do is you can check in with your own pinball machine. And here's what I mean by that. Another person whom I've had a lot of difficulty with in my life is my adoptive mom. And, the thing that makes, I think, parental-kid relationships difficult is because a lot of that pinball architecture gets created before we have a rational mind as a kid, right? And some of it's intergenerational. I can't speak to that. I'm not an expert in that, but I think there's been enough science to show that intergenerational trauma is and can be real. Um, so another way that you can work with the habit loop and work with yourself from a Zen perspective is as you feel your body reacting and responding to the difficulty that's happening with you and another, right? Maybe put your hand on that place, right? Or bring your awareness to that place. So for me, often my heart rate will go up. Okay, they're there, right? I had an experience with my adoptive mom where when we would argue about this one thing that we often argued about, not only did I feel it in a place in my body, but it was also associated with an age, right? With an age. So, wow, I just became 11, and I'm now 50, but like at the time I was in my 30s, and it's like I'm a 30-year-old person, but I'm having a felt experience in my body of being an 11-year-old. That's not a fair fight either, right? So if you can recognize within yourself where this is, where in my pinball this is getting, my pinball machine, is this getting stuck, or does it hurt, or is there a blockage? And then get really curious about that. And for me, it's about how old am I in this moment? Because although that was not a relationship between my adoptive mom and me, that I could say that, like I was not going to say like, I feel like I'm 11 right now, because she was not into fair fighting, right? But that was information that was useful for me to have. And then I could work through that. What is it about at a different time when I felt safe? What is it about that at 11? Why that part, right? Now, the other thing I want to say is this pinball energy often, I would say, with greatest efficacy, is not solved with this. It's solved through the body. The body knows how to solve what's in the body, right? Heather told us several stories earlier this week about her own experience of things feeling stuck during Zazen and how she made choices to release them, right? To be choiceful, to be intentional about releasing all the gripping energy that was holding her hip, right? And to be mindful of releasing that, in your case, Heather, I think it was your left shoulder, right? That you would jack up, to be mindful of releasing that. Let's just do it right now, right? Take your shoulders all the way up to your ears and really, really hold it there, kind of tighten it. If it's comfortable, tighten it as much as you can. And now let them drop. It is possible for our body to do some of these releases. And so this is one of the reasons why, for example, in our tradition, we recommend Zen body work. We've got some people in our meeting today who are Zen body workers, right? That there's a way of releasing, physically releasing some of these places so that our pinball machine eventually just looks like like a pristine, clear, no snags, no loops, no like crazy stuck paddles that, won't stop flipping around, right? But that anything that's coming into this system can just rinse through, can just rinse through. I want to say one more thing before we have a little time for discussion, and that is the typical Western way that we think about relationship with others. is very therapeutic in a, talking therapy, right? And some of that can be useful. But when you work with your body and its intelligence about where it's stuck and its intelligence about being able to penetrate the other's body and its intelligence about what is arising, right? The efficiency of your body can go so much deeper than traditional modalities of talk therapy, which are often reliant on another person, are reliant on a therapist. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't need talk therapy sometimes, because on the other hand, right, we can't just come into a Zen practice and think that 20 years of abuse will float away on a cushion, right? That's called spiritual bypassing, and it's also not useful. So, depending on where you are, you may need a little bit of both. But my argument would be only one kind of working with yourself, maybe in your head and through your talking. You may have some incredible gains through that, but in my experience, this system, not only can give me incredible information about what's really going on, but when my body can be open and my body can be empty, right? It's going to be really difficult for me to cause anyone else suffering through difficulty, or to be caused suffering by other people. So let me stop there for now, see if there are any additional reflections from you or questions that I may or may not have the answer to. Well, I'm going to close with a story then, a quick story. And prior to being married, my relationship with my adoptive mom was by far the most violent, volatile, and insane relationship I'd ever had. And a few years ago, after I had been practicing in Zen for several years, and I actually want to say one other thing about my practice in Zen. For like 12 years, I practiced Shambhala Meditation, which is a repetition of mantras where it's like, may I be happy and healthy, may I be peaceful and at ease. You kind of pick your mantras, but there are some standard ones. And then what you would do after you treated yourself to all these delicacies, you would extend them to like somebody you really cared about, or a baby or an animal or somebody very close to you that you love a lot. And you try to just continue to ripple and ripple and ripple that out, right? So on the far edge of my ripples would be my adoptive mom. Like, it was a stretch, but I was trying to wish her peace and ease, right? So I did Shambhala meditation, and then I came to our dojo. And over the course of one weekend through IZL, I recognized that this working with the body was it. It was so much more efficient. And in fact, right over my shoulder here is a bamboo shinai. It's a bamboo sword. And in the dojo that weekend, I was at a Zen leadership workshop, but we had an opportunity to practice our breathing by raising and lowering the sword. And we would make a sound like might have been yat or ai, right? And through doing that repetitive martial arts sword work, I had more freedom. I understood more about the power of Zazen than I did in the prior 12 years of my meditation, my Shambhala meditation. And that's not to disparage Shambhala, because I was getting a lot out of it. I wouldn't have stayed with it for 12 years if I wasn't. But the efficiency of working with the body was something I had never experienced before. So fast forward to the story I want to close with about the body. and fighting. So I'd been training in our form of Zen and doing a lot of sitting and going to a lot of retreats. And there came a time when I had to confront my adoptive mother. And I say confront, but I needed to meet with her. And I hadn't seen her in a long time, but it was time to meet with her. She had taken a turn in her health. And I called my friend Gretchen, my lifelong friend Gretchen, who still lives in near the hometown where we both grew up. And I said, I'm gonna go see Inez this weekend. And she said, tell me where and when. And God love Gretchen. She just came and she sat with me in the waiting room outside Inez's room, she didn't do a thing. She was just with me, right? But it was just enough to kind of get me nice and grounded down. And I went in to my mom's room, and I will never forget opening the door. The door it felt so heavy, and it was a heavier door. It's intended to be soundproof, but I opened the door, and she was sitting in her wheelchair and she was asleep. So I did what I know how to do. I just centered my posture on my 2 feet, felt my feet ground in, get really grounded. And I started to match her breathing, just match her breathing. So when her breathing was a little, I made my breathing a little, feeling in, feeling in, feeling in. And at some point, she woke up and she saw me. And the feeling I got was of her coiling like a snake. And she looked right into the center of me with her hardest, meanest expression, something I had seen so many times in my life. And she said, I don't even know who you are. And I had the feeling that she had sent an arrow with a poison tip. This was like her first advance to engage me in the way that we had routinely engaged each other. And her arrow came and it went right through me and it fell onto the ground behind me. And I was like, wow, like, okay. So that arrow didn't stick. She curled tighter. She said, I don't want you here. Second arrow, same thing. And I said calmly, I said, you do know who I am. And I'm here to tell you that I love you. And I wish you the best. I wish you the best. And I just sat with her for a while. And it did go through my mind, like, maybe she really doesn't know who I am. And maybe she really doesn't want me there. And I just sat quietly, sort of in the wonder of what had happened between us. How she had tried to, in the pinball metaphor, she had pulled really far back on that pinball spring and she let it fly. And she was expecting a whole bunch of this. And it's like the ball flew right out of the back of the machine. There was nothing for it to stick to. There were no bumpers, no boundaries, no ding-da-da-ding-ding for it to go through. And after a time, I left. Gretchen was still there, and we went out. She's like, what happened? And I told her what happened. And later that afternoon, my Aunt Faye called. And my aunts, Faye and Carol, they check in on my mom every day. And it's like they're in their 80s, and my mom is now in her 90s. And they're so sweet, these sisters with each other. And my Aunt Faye called, and she said, I'm going to do the impression because it's funny. She goes, Becky, What happened today? I said, what do you mean? She said, were you up at the nursing home? And I said, yeah, I stopped in. And she said, your mom can't stop talking about the most important person in her life was there today, and you had the best visit. And she just kept going on and on and on. And I thought to myself that this interaction with Inez had set both of us free. So, clean up your pinball machines. And you may not be able to do it with your thinking mind. And that's perfect. Because this body is your dojo. And it has its own intelligence. It has its own intelligence. So don't believe the delusion of self and other. Right? Let that go. Become the other. Right? Penetrate their experience. Create a little space for yourself so you don't get snagged by cues, snagged by response, right? Snagged by reward. I thank you for the sincerity of your practice. Thank you for spending some time with me today, with all of us today. Thank you for those who visited with us, and encourage you to, if you feel so inclined, to attend others of our events. And I'm going to put it in the chat now. We are here for all of us, every one of us. And if you'd like to make a contribution to support the work of Chosei Zen, we thank you for it.